Anna adjusted her worn-out jacket as she stepped onto the cracked sidewalk, clutching a grocery list in her hand. The cold wind bit at her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was occupied with numbers: what she could afford, what she needed to stretch until next week, and what she'd have to leave behind once again. She had been scraping by for months, working long shifts at the diner, picking up extra cleaning jobs when she could, and still, the bills loomed over her like a storm cloud that never passed. Rent was due in a few days, and she barely had enough to cover it, let alone anything extra. As she turned the corner toward the grocery store, a frail voice caught her attention. "Excuse me, dear," an elderly man called out, struggling to balance a small bag of groceries while leaning on his cane. He stood beside a shopping trolley, his face lined with deep wrinkles, his pale blue eyes filled with frustration. "Would you mind giving me a hand?" Anna hesitated. She was exhausted, her own burdens weighing heavily on her, but something about the man's unsteady stance and the way his fingers trembled around his cane made her step forward. "Of course," she said, adjusting her grip on her own list and reaching out to take his bag. "Where do you need this?" "Just in my shopping trolley, if you don't mind," he said with a tired smile. "My hands aren't what they used to be." Anna carefully placed the bag inside, making sure nothing shifted too much. When she turned back around, he was watching her with a thoughtful expression. "You're kind to stop," he said. "Most people just walk right past." She shrugged. "It's nothing, really. Just seemed like you could use a hand." He nodded approvingly. "What's your name, young lady?" "Anna's." "Nice to meet you, Anna. I'm William." His voice had a warmth to it, despite its wavering quality. He looked like he had stories to tell, the kind only time could give a person. "Do you live around here?" she asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. "Not far," he said. "Just a few blocks over. Been in the same house for over 40 years. But getting around isn't as easy as it used to be." Anna glanced at his cane and the way his hands shook slightly. "Do you have anyone to help you?" William chuckled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "Oh, I manage, but the truth is my wife passed a few years back and my kids live out of state. They call when they can, but day-to-day things, well, they get a bit tricky." Anna felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what loneliness felt like. It settled in the quiet moments, in the spaces where people once were. "Do you need help getting home?" she asked before she could stop herself. William looked surprised, then grateful. "If you wouldn't mind walking with me. I usually drive, but my leg's been acting up, and I don't like taking chances." "Of course," she said again, falling into step beside him as they made their way down the street. As they walked, they talked. William told her about his late wife, Margaret, and how they had built a life together in the small house at the end of Maple Street. He told her about his days as a businessman, how he had worked hard for years, and how retirement had been both a blessing and a curse. Anna, in turn, shared little pieces of her own life. She told him about the diner, about the long hours and the aching feet. She didn't mention the overdue bills or the constant worry of making ends meet, but somehow she suspected he already knew. By the time they reached his house, William sighed heavily. "I appreciate this more than you know," he said. "Would you mind helping me bring these inside?" Anna followed him up the front steps and into the house. It was warm and inviting, but had the unmistakable air of a place that hadn't been tended to as much as it needed. Dust clung to the bookshelves, and unopened mail sat on the table near the door. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted, "and I've let things pile up more than I should." She hesitated, then said, "If you ever need help with anything, I don't mind stopping by." William looked at her, surprised. "You do that?" "Sure," she said. "I mean, I don't have much free time, but if you ever need groceries or something fixed, I can help." His eyes softened. "That's a rare kindness, Anna." She smiled, brushing off the compliment. It's nothing, really. But as she left his house that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this small act of kindness would mean more than she realized. Anna found herself returning to William's house the next afternoon. She hadn't planned on it, she had a shift at the diner later that evening, and a list of things she needed to take care of, but something about the way he had looked at her before she left the day before had stayed with her. There was an unspoken gratitude in his eyes, a quiet longing for company that she understood all too well. When she knocked on his door, it took a moment before she heard the shuffle of footsteps. The door creaked open, and William blinked at her in surprise. "Anna," he said slowly, his grip tightening on the doorknob. "Did I forget something?" She shook her head. "No, I just thought I'd check in, see if you needed anything." William studied her for a moment before a small smile tugged at his lips. "Well, that's mighty kind of you. Come on in." Anna stepped inside, and the familiar scent of old books and faintly lingering coffee greeted her. The house was the same as she had left it, cozy, but cluttered. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. "Would you like some tea?" William asked, already making his way toward the kitchen. She hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "Nonsense, you came all this way. Sit down, and I'll put the kettle on." Anna sat at the kitchen table, glancing around as William moved with slow, measured steps. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the kettle, and she resisted the urge to step in and do it for him. He was proud, that much was clear. The last thing he needed was to feel incapable in his own home. "You live in that little apartment complex on Pine Street, don't you?" William asked as he placed two mismatched mugs on the table. She nodded. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's what can afford right now." William stirred his tea thoughtfully. "I used to know someone who lived there. Back when it was new, it was a nice place. Time changes things, though." Anna traced the rim of her mug with her finger. "Yeah, it does." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall filled the space between them. Then William cleared his throat. "I appreciate you stopping by," he said. "Not many people do." Anna met his gaze. "I know how that feels." William studied her for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "You've been through your share of hard times, haven't you?" She hesitated, not used to talking about herself in this way. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." He didn't press her for details, and she was grateful for it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "You know, I used to be a busy man," he said. "Meetings, business trips, always on the move. Thought I was doing it all for my family, but now—" He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "Now, I have all this time and no one to spend it with." Anna frowned. "Your kids don't visit." "They try," he admitted, "but they've got their own lives, their own families. I don't blame them, but it does get mighty quiet around here." Anna understood that kind of quiet. The kind that settled into your bones, making even the liveliest places feel empty. "Well," she said, standing up, "I love to stop by when I have time." William's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. "You really mean that?" "Yeah," she said simply, "I do." And that was how it started. Over the next few weeks, Anna found herself making regular visits to William's house. Sometimes she helped him with small things, changing a light bulb, carrying in groceries, fixing a loose cabinet hinge. Other times, they simply sat and talked. He told her stories about his past, about the business he had built from the ground up, about the places he had traveled to. In turn, Anna shared bits and pieces of her own life. She told him about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table when she was a child. About how she had dreamed of going to college, but life had other plans. About how she had been trying to get back on her feet for longer than she cared to admit. One afternoon, as she dusted off a bookshelf in the living room, William watched her with a thoughtful expression. You know, he said, you remind me of someone I used to know. Anna glanced over her shoulder. Oh yeah, who? He smiled faintly. My wife. She was always taking care of people. Even when she had her own troubles, she found time to help others. Anna paused, her rag still in hand. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was, William said softly. Silence stretched between them before he cleared his throat and straightened in his chair. You don't have to keep doing this, you know. She frowned. Doing what? Helping me, spending your time here. I know you've got plenty on your plate. Anna sighed, setting the rag down. William, if I didn't want to be here, I wouldn't be. He studied her for a moment before nodding. All right then. She smiled. Good. Now, do you have a vacuum that actually works, or am I going to have to wrestle with this antique over here? For the first time in a long while, William laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that filled the room. And for the first time in a long while, Anna felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Anna's routine had changed without her even realizing it. Between long shifts at the diner, she found herself weaving through the quiet streets toward William's house more often than she had planned. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into something more a sense of familiarity, of quiet companionship that neither of them had expected, but both had come to rely on. William, for all his insistence that he was fine on his own, had started to look forward to her visits. Anna could see it in the way he left the door unlocked when he knew she was coming, or how he always had a fresh cup of tea waiting for her on the worn wooden table. One afternoon, as Anna walked up the steps, she noticed something unusual. The mail had piled up again, but this time there were more envelopes than usual. A few were thick, official-looking. She knocked, and when William opened the door, he looked more tired than she had ever seen him. William, she said with concern, you all right? He waved a hand, trying to brush it off, but there was a heaviness in his movements. Just a little under the weather, nothing to fuss over. Anna wasn't convinced. She followed him inside and glanced toward the table where the unopened mail sat. You've got a lot of letters here, she noted. Want me to go through them with you? He hesitated just for a second too long. It's nothing urgent. Anna picked up one of the envelopes out of curiosity, scanning the return address. This looks like legal paperwork. William sighed and sat down heavily in his chair. It is. She set the envelope down carefully. Do you need help with it? He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, finally, he nodded. Anna sat across from him as he started opening the envelopes with slow, deliberate movements. Some were statements regarding property, others were legal documents mentioning assets and accounts. As she skimmed through them, a realization settled in. William, she said slowly, this isn't just any paperwork. She looked up at him. You have a lot of assets, way more than you've told about. He chuckled, though there was no humor in it. I suppose I do. Anna leaned back, trying to process it. Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, didn't seem relevant. Money doesn't solve everything, you know. She frowned. No, but it makes things easier. William studied her, his expression unreadable. And has it ever made things easier for you? Anna hesitated. I wouldn't know. I've never had enough to find out. He nodded as if he had expected that answer. I worked my whole life for what I have, he said. Built a business from the ground up, made investments, played my cards right. But in the end, all it got me was a big house I don't need and a bank account that doesn't keep me company. Anna didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life worrying about money, stretching every last cent, and here was a man who had more than he could ever spend, yet he was alone. Anna, he said after a moment, why do you keep helping me? Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? You come here, you check on me, you help me with things that aren't your responsibility, and I know you don't have time to waste. So why? She thought about it. The truth was, she wasn't even sure anymore. At first, it had been a simple act of kindness, but somewhere along the way, it had turned into something more. I guess. She started, then sighed. I guess because I know what it's like to feel like you're doing everything alone, and sometimes you just need someone to remind you that you're not. William didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. That's more valuable than money, you know. Anna shook her head with a small laugh. Maybe, but money still pays the bills. He chuckled, fair enough. They sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of unspoken thoughts settling between them. Over the next few days, Anna noticed a change in William. He seemed more thoughtful, almost as if he was working something out in his mind. He started asking her more questions about her life, her plans, what she wanted for the future. One evening, as she was helping him sort through some old belongings, he suddenly asked, "If you could do anything, what would it be?" Anna glanced up from the stack of books she had been organizing. "What do you mean?" "If money weren't a problem, if you could wake up tomorrow and do anything, what would it be?" She hesitated. It was a question she hadn't allowed herself to think about in years. "I don't know," she admitted. "I used to have dreams, but life kind of got in the way." William nodded as if he understood. "Maybe it's time you start thinking about them again." Anna let out a soft laugh. "I appreciate the sentiment, but thinking about things I can't afford doesn't help much." William didn't argue. He just watched her, a thoughtful look in his eyes. A few days later, Anna arrived at his house to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. "I need to talk to you," he said as soon as she walked in. There was something different in his tone, something serious. She sat down cautiously. "What is it?" William took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how sometimes people just need someone to remind them they're not alone." Anna waited as he carefully chose his words. "I don't have family nearby," he continued. "And truth be told, I don't have many people I trust. But you've been here without expecting anything in return. That means something to me." She frowned slightly. "William, you don't owe me anything." He smiled. "I know, but that doesn't mean I can't do something for you." Anna's stomach twisted slightly. "What do you mean?" He tapped the papers in front of him. "I've been making arrangements, and I want to make sure you're taken care of." Anna stared at him, her heart pounding. "William, what are you saying?" He met her gaze, his expression steady. "I'm saying that kindness shouldn't go unrewarded." A strange, uneasy feeling settled in Anna's chest. She had never done any of this expecting something in return. But from the way William was looking at her, she realized that whatever he had planned, it was going to change everything. Anna sat across from William, her hands resting on the edge of the kitchen table as she tried to wrap her mind around what he had just said. His words echoed in her head, heavy with meaning. He wanted to make sure she was taken care of, but what did that even mean? She took a slow breath, steadying herself before speaking. "William, I don't understand. What exactly are you saying?" He folded his hands together, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "I'm saying that I've made some decisions about my finances, and I want you to be a part of them." Her heart pounded. "I don't need anything from you, William. I didn't help you expecting a reward." A small smile touched his lips. "I know that. That's exactly why I want to do this." He gestured toward the stack of papers in front of him. "I've been going over my accounts, making sure everything is in order. And I've decided that I want to give you something that might make your life a little easier." Anna's stomach twisted with uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" He leaned forward slightly. "I've set aside $50,000 for you." The words hit her like a freight train. She blinked, convinced she had misheard him. 50,000. He nodded. "Yes, it's not a loan, it's not charity. It's my way of thanking you for everything you've done for me." Anna shook her head, disbelief washing over her. "William, I can't accept that. It's too much." His expression remained calm, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "Anna, let me ask you something. If you had never met me, would you still be struggling?" She swallowed. "Yes, but—" "And if you hadn't helped me, would you still be working yourself to exhaustion every day just to stay afloat?" She hesitated, unsure where he was going with this. "I guess so." "Then why shouldn't I do something to change that?" He leaned back, his gaze steady. "You didn't come into my life looking for anything, Anna. You showed up time and time again when you didn't have to. You helped me, not just with groceries or small tasks, but with something much more important. You reminded me that I wasn't alone." Anna felt her throat tighten. She had never expected anything in return for helping William. She had done it because she knew what it felt like to be alone, to struggle silently while the rest of the world moved on. She shook her head again. "I don't know if I can take this, William. I wouldn't even know what to do with that kind of money." His lips curved slightly. "You'd figure it out." She let out a shaky breath. "But why me? You could donate it to charity or—" William cut her off gently. "Because, Anna, I want to see the difference it makes. I want to know that I'm doing something meaningful for someone who deserves it." She sat there in silence, her thoughts racing. The idea of having that kind of money was overwhelming. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. But it also felt unreal, like something out of a story that didn't belong to her. She finally looked up at him. "You're really serious about this?" "As serious as I've ever been," he said. Her fingers gripped the fabric of her jeans as she tried to process it. "What would you want in return?" William frowned, almost offended by the question. "Nothing, absolutely nothing." Anna exhaled, still struggling to believe what was happening. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "Just promise me one thing." She met his gaze. "What?" "Promise me you'll use it to make things better for yourself. That you'll stop working yourself into the ground just to survive." Anna felt something deep within her shift, an unfamiliar sense of relief mixed with disbelief. Could she really accept this? Could she allow herself to take something that could change her life? She thought about the overdue bills, the constant anxiety, the way she had spent so long just barely getting by. And then she thought about William, about how lonely he had been before she came into his life, about how he had trusted her enough to do something this monumental. She swallowed hard, then gave a slow nod. "Okay, I promise." William smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made the lines on his face soften. "Good." Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he said simply. She looked down at the table, at the papers that represented a future she had never thought possible. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: hope. Anna didn't sleep much that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. The idea of having that kind of money, of no longer living paycheck to paycheck, was overwhelming. It felt like a dream, one she was afraid to wake up from. By morning, she still hadn't fully processed it, but she knew one thing: she couldn't waste this opportunity. She had promised William she would use the money to make her life better, and she intended to keep that promise. The first thing she did was pay off the overdue bills that had been haunting her for months. The weight in her chest lessened slightly as she made the payments, knowing that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't drowning. Next, she reduced her hours at the diner. She still needed to work, but she no longer had to push herself to exhaustion just to survive. With more time on her hands, she started thinking about what she truly wanted for her future. One afternoon, as she sat in her small apartment looking over her expenses, she realized something she had never allowed herself to dream beyond survival. She had spent so many years just trying to get by that she had forgotten to think about what she actually wanted out of life. The answer came to her unexpectedly. She had always loved working with people, always found fulfillment in helping others. Maybe it was time to do something with that. The next time she visited William, he was sitting on the porch, watching the street with a thoughtful expression. She sat beside him, taking in the quiet rustling of the trees. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment. William turned his head slightly. "About what?" "About what I want to do with my life." He nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I think I want to go back to school," she admitted. "I don't know exactly what for yet, but I want to do something meaningful, something that helps people." A slow smile spread across his face. "That sounds like a fine idea." Anna exhaled, feeling the weight of the decision settle into place. "It's scary, though. I haven't been in a classroom in years." He chuckled. "You'll figure it out. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She looked at him, gratitude filling her chest. "I wouldn't be able to do this without you." William shook his head. "You were always capable, Anna. You just needed a little breathing room to see it." Over the next few weeks, Anna started looking into schools, exploring programs that aligned with her interests. She still worked at the diner part-time, but for the first time, she wasn't just working to survive, she was working toward something. She also continued visiting William, though now their conversations carried a new kind of energy. She shared her plans with him, and he listened intently, offering advice when she needed it. One evening, as they sat in his living room, William leaned back in his chair, a reflective look in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I spent years building a business, making money, thinking that was the most important thing. But none of it mattered as much as the people in my life." Anna listened, sensing there was more. "I don't regret working hard," he continued, "but I do regret not spending more time with the ones who mattered. That's something money can't fix." She nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't before. "I think we all get caught up in survival sometimes. It's easy to forget what's really important." William studied her for a moment. "That's why I wanted to help you, Anna, because you reminded me of what matters." She felt a lump in her throat but swallowed it down. "I don't know how to thank you." He smiled. "You already have." As the months passed, Anna enrolled in a program that felt right for her. She balanced school and work, but for the first time, she wasn't just getting through the days, she was building something. She still visited William regularly, and he remained her biggest supporter, always eager to hear about her progress. One afternoon, as she arrived at his house, she found him sitting in his favorite chair, looking out the window with a peaceful expression. "You look content," she said as she sat down beside him. He nodded slowly. "I am." Anna glanced around the house, remembering the first time she had stepped inside. It had felt empty then, but now it felt full of memories, of warmth, of something that had been missing before. "You did that, you know," William said, as if reading her thoughts. She raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "Brought life back into this place." Anna smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I think we did that for each other." He chuckled. "Maybe so." As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Anna continued her studies, working toward a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. William, in turn, found comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. Their friendship had started as an act of kindness, but it had become something more, a bond that had changed both of their lives in ways neither of them had expected. And in the end, that was what mattered most.